The Galactic Council's emergency session erupts in chaos as they vote to exile David Porter to the ice planet Glacius VII. Tension fills the air as the 35-year-old former Earth military commander is forcibly sedated, his unconscious form unceremoniously loaded onto an automated transport ship. The Council's decision is clear. Make an example of David to deter further human expansion. As the ship breaches Glacius VII's atmosphere, alarms blare, systems malfunction, and the vessel plummets towards the frozen surface. The impact jolts David awake, his body aching from the crash. He surveys the wreckage, the harsh reality of his exile sinking in. Glacius VII's biting wind whips around him as he stumbles from the ship, searching for supplies. In the distance, an unexpected sight catches his eye. A structure, clearly not natural, stands against the stark white landscape. David's military training kicks in as he approaches cautiously. It's a hidden outpost, he realizes, belonging to the Vidians, a reclusive alien species known for their advanced biotechnology. As David edges closer, a figure emerges from the outpost. It's Daphne, a Vidian scientist, her appearance both alien and alluring. She regards David with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "A human? Here?" she asks, her voice a melodic trill. David explains his situation, and Daphne's expression shifts from suspicion to intrigue. She reveals a startling truth. The Vidians have been secretly terraforming part of Glacius VII. As they talk, David notices Daphne's enhanced physical attributes, adaptations to survive the harsh environment that humans find strangely attractive. Daphne leads David into the outpost, where he's struck by the prevalence of female Vidians. She explains their genetic modifications have affected male fertility, leaving their colony predominantly female. The implications of this revelation aren't lost on David. The Vidian leader approaches, her gaze scrutinizing the human before her. She offers David a deal, sanctuary in exchange for his help with their terraforming project and potential assistance with their reproductive challenges. The offer hangs in the air, heavy with possibility. David's mind races. Aligning with the Vidians could provide leverage against the Galactic Council, potentially saving humanity from further persecution. But the thought of escaping to warn Earth of the Council's true intentions tugs at him. As he weighs his options, David realizes the gravity of his decision. It's not just his fate at stake, but potentially that of both humanity and the Vidians. The icy winds of Glacius VII howl outside, a reminder of the harsh reality he faces. With a deep breath, David makes his choice. He extends his hand to the Vidian leader, accepting their offer of cooperation. As their hands meet, sealing the agreement, David can't help but wonder what consequences this decision will bring. Will it lead to conflict with the Galactic Council? How will this new human-Vidian alliance unfold? The die is cast. On this remote ice planet, far from the reaches of the Galactic Council, an unlikely partnership is forged. David Porter, the human sent to die, now stands at the precipice of a new future, one that could reshape the galaxy itself. As the implications of his decision settled in, David found himself thrust into the heart of the Vidian colony. The icy winds of Glacius VII faded into the background as he immersed himself in their advanced society. Daphne became his constant companion, guiding him through the intricacies of their terraforming project. Her melodic voice explained complex theories as they worked side by side in the colony's state-of-the-art laboratories. "Our biotechnology allows us to alter our genetic structure," Daphne said, her eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. She demonstrated by extending her arm, which visibly thickened and grew more muscular. "This adaptation helps us survive in this harsh environment." David watched, fascinated. "That's incredible. How does it affect your daily life?" "We're stronger, faster, and heal more quickly," she replied, her arm returning to its normal state. "But it comes at a cost." As they delved deeper into their work, David met other key members of the colony. Lyra, the lead geneticist, approached him one day, her gaze intense and curious. "Your presence here is unexpected," she said, studying him closely, "but potentially valuable." Zara, the colony's security chief, was more direct in her interest. "I've never met a human before," she said. circling David with a predatory grace. Your species has quite a reputation. David found himself drawn to these Vidian women, their enhanced physiology striking him as undeniably attractive. He pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. As days turned into weeks, David's military background proved invaluable. During a strategy meeting, he proposed a novel approach to accelerate the terraforming process. If we recalibrate the atmospheric processors to account for the planet's axial tilt, he explained, pointing to a holographic map, we could increase efficiency by at least 30%. The Vidian scientists exchanged impressed glances. Daphne beamed at him, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture of approval. However, as David integrated further into the colony, he began to notice undercurrents of tension. The Vidian males, far outnumbered by females, watched him with growing hostility. One evening, as David worked late in the lab, he overheard a heated conversation between two male technicians. "Another human here will only make things worse," one hissed. "We're already struggling to—" The voice cut off as they noticed David's presence. The technicians hurried away, leaving David puzzled and uneasy. He sought out Daphne, finding her in the hydroponics bay. "What's going on with the male population here?" he asked. "There seems to be some discontent." Daphne's expression grew somber. "Our genetic modifications have had unintended consequences," she explained. "Male fertility has drastically declined. It's threatening our long-term survival." The revelation hit David hard. He realized the implications not just for the Vidians, but potentially for his own role in the colony. Before he could process this information fully, alarms blared throughout the facility. David and Daphne rushed to the central command center, where screens displayed a series of encoded transmissions. Zara, her face tight with concern, turned to them. "We've detected Galactic Council probes in orbit. They're scanning the planet's surface." David's heart raced. "They're looking for me," he said, the realization dawning. "My exile wasn't random. They wanted me here." The Vidian leader stepped forward, her gaze sharp. "Explain," she demanded. David shared his suspicions, detailing the Council's likely motives for monitoring Glacius VII. As he spoke, he could see the trust he'd built with the Vidians solidifying further. In the midst of this crisis, Lyra approached David, her expression a mix of hope and trepidation. "I have a proposal," she said, leading him to a quiet corner. "We believe human DNA might be key to solving our fertility issues. Would you consider donating genetic material for our research?" David's mind reeled. The request was unexpected, its potential consequences enormous. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the command center's entrance. Thorn, the colony's military commander, stormed in, flanked by a group of agitated male Vidians. "This human's presence puts us all at risk," he shouted, pointing accusingly at David. "He must be removed before he brings the full wrath of the Galactic Council upon us." The room erupted into chaos, with voices shouting over one another. David found himself at the center of a storm, the future of both the Vidian colony and his own fate hanging in the balance. As arguments raged around him, David locked eyes with Daphne across the room. In that moment, he knew his decision would shape not just his own destiny, but potentially that of two species. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he prepared to make a choice that could alter the course of galactic history. David took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the faces surrounding him in the command center. The chaos of shouting voices faded as he made his decision. "I'll do it," he announced, his voice cutting through the din. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "I'll participate in the genetic research project." Lyra's eyes lit up with excitement, while Thorn's face darkened with barely concealed anger. Daphne stepped forward, her hand brushing David's arm in a gesture of support. "Thank you, David," Lyra said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This could be the key to our survival." Over the next few weeks, David found himself spending more and more time in the research facility. The sterile environment, filled with advanced biotechnology, became almost a second home. Daphne was often by his side, explaining the intricacies of Vidian genetics and the potential applications of human DNA. One evening, as they pored over holographic representations of DNA strands, Daphne's hand accidentally brushed against David's. The touch sent an electric current through him, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared intensity. "I think we're onto something here," Daphne said, her voice soft. She pointed to a specific sequence in the hologram. "This element in your DNA, it's unlike anything we've seen before. It could be the missing piece we need." As they worked, David couldn't help but notice the growing hostility from some of the male Vidians. Thorn, in particular, seemed to be gathering a following. David often caught snippets of hushed conversations that fell silent as he approached. The terraforming project, meanwhile, was progressing at an unprecedented rate. David's military background and strategic thinking had led to several breakthroughs. As he stood on a viewing platform with Zara, surveying the landscape, he could see patches of green breaking through the ice. "Your contributions have been invaluable," Zara said, her gaze intense as she studied David's profile. "But be careful. Not everyone appreciates the changes you're bringing." Before David could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. They rushed to the command center, where screens displayed a series of encoded transmissions. "Galactic Council probes," Zara explained, her fingers flying over the controls. "They're scanning the planet's surface. We need to hide our presence, and fast." David's mind raced. "We can use the terraforming equipment to create a temporary atmospheric disturbance," he suggested. "It'll interfere with their scans." As they worked to implement the plan, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The genetic research was yielding promising results, but the growing divide within the colony threatened to tear everything apart. One night, as David and Daphne worked late in the lab, the tension between them finally reached a breaking point. Their eyes met over a microscope, and suddenly they were in each other's arms. The kiss was electric, a fusion of human passion and Vidian intensity. As they broke apart, breathless, David saw a mix of emotions in Daphne's eyes. "This complicates things," she whispered. Before they could discuss further, Lyra burst into the lab, her face alight with excitement. "We've done it," she exclaimed. "The hybrid embryo is viable. We can proceed with the next phase." The news spread quickly through the colony, sparking heated debates. David found himself at the center of a storm of controversy. Some Vidians saw him as a savior, others as a threat to their very existence. Thorn seized upon the unrest, his voice carrying across the crowded meeting hall. "Are we to sacrifice our genetic purity for this human?" He spat the word like a curse. "He'll bring the wrath of the Galactic Council upon us all." As the arguments raged, Zara pulled David aside, her voice low and urgent. "We've detected an unauthorized transmission from the colony," she said. "Someone's been in contact with the Galactic Council." David's blood ran cold. He knew they were out of time. The Council would be coming, and they needed to be ready. As he looked around at the faces of the Vidians, some friendly, some hostile, all alien, yet somehow familiar, David realized that his fate was now inextricably linked with theirs. Whatever came next, they would face it together. With Daphne on one side and Zara on the other, David steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The future of two species hung in the balance, and he was at the center of it all. As alarms blared once again, signaling the approach of Galactic Council ships, David knew that the real test was only just beginning. The blaring alarms signaling the approach of Galactic Council ships jolted David into action. He exchanged a determined glance with Daphne and Zara, knowing they had precious little time to prepare. "We need to hide our progress," Zara said, her voice tight with urgency. "If the Council sees how far we've come with the terraforming, they'll know something's amiss." David nodded, his mind racing. "We'll have to shut down the terraforming equipment and disguise the habitable areas. Make them look like natural phenomena." As they hurried to implement their plan, the colony erupted into a flurry of activity. Vidians rushed to conceal advanced technology, while others worked to create convincing illusions of an untouched, icy landscape. Amidst the chaos, Zara suddenly grabbed David's arm, her eyes wide. "David, we've intercepted a transmission. It's Thorn. He's been in contact with the Galactic Council." The revelation hit David like a punch to the gut. They'd been betrayed from within. Without hesitation, he, Daphne, and Zara moved to confront the traitor. They found Thorn in the communications center, his back to the door as he hunched over a console. David stepped forward, his voice cold. "It's over, Thorn." The Vidian spun around, his face contorting with rage. "You!" he spat, lunging at David. The two crashed into a bank of equipment, grappling fiercely. David's military training kicked in as he fought to subdue Thorn, but the Vidian's enhanced strength made him a formidable opponent. As they struggled, Thorn's elbow smashed into a control panel. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and Zara's face paled. "He's activated the emergency beacon." David felt a surge of desperation. Their plan to hide was now impossible. The Galactic Council would be headed straight for them. Daphne helped David to his feet as Zara secured the now unconscious Thorn. "What do we do now?" Daphne asked, her voice trembling slightly. David took a deep breath, an idea forming. "We need to buy time, and I think I know how." He outlined his plan quickly, using Vidian biotechnology to alter his appearance, allowing him to pose as a colony leader and negotiate with the council representatives. Lyra, summoned to the impromptu meeting, listened with growing excitement. "It's risky," she said, "but it might just work. I can perform the procedure. But David, you need to understand, this will be painful, and there may be unforeseen consequences." David met her gaze steadily. "I understand. Let's do it." The next few hours were a blur of pain and disorientation for David. He lay on a biobed in Lyra's lab, gritting his teeth as waves of agony coursed through his body. Daphne remained by his side, her hand clasping his, offering silent support. As the procedure neared its end, David felt a strange surge of energy. His vision sharpened, and he could feel new strength flowing through his muscles. Lyra's eyes widened as she examined her readings. "Fascinating," she murmured. "It seems the process has granted you some Vidian physical enhancements, increased strength, rapid healing. This could be invaluable." Before they could discuss further, Zara's voice came over the comm system. "The council ship is entering the atmosphere. We're out of time." David stood marveling at his transformed appearance in a nearby reflective surface. He now looked entirely Vidian, down to the last detail. "Let's hope this is convincing enough," he said. As they made their way to the landing site, David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The colony's fate rested on his ability to maintain this deception. The Galactic Council ship touched down in a swirl of ice and snow. David, flanked by Daphne and Zara, stepped forward to greet the descending figures. At their head was a tall, imposing man with cold, piercing eyes. "I am Commander Vex," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Vidians. "We're here to conduct a thorough inspection of this colony." David stepped forward, forcing himself to project confidence. "Welcome, Commander. I am Davin, leader of this colony. We're honored by your presence." Vex's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you now? Well, Davin, perhaps you can explain why we detected an emergency beacon from this location." David's mind raced, but his face remained impassive. "A simple malfunction, Commander. Our equipment sometimes struggles with the extreme cold. I assure you, everything here is in order." Vex didn't look convinced. "We'll see about that. I want a full tour of your facilities. Immediately." As they began the inspection, David could feel the strain of maintaining his facade. Every question from Vex felt like a trap, every glance a potential unmasking. He drew on his military experience, keeping his responses measured and consistent. But as they moved deeper into the colony, Vex's suspicion seemed to grow. He commented on the advanced state of their equipment, the unexpected progress of their adaptation to the harsh environment. David felt a bead of sweat form on his brow, despite the cold. He caught Daphne's concerned glance and realized she had noticed something wrong. The strain of the genetic modification was taking its toll. He could feel a tremor in his hands, a weakness creeping into his limbs. Just as Vex was demanding access to their research facilities, a commotion erupted from the direction of the holding cells. David's heart sank as he recognized the voice shouting in the distance. Thorn had escaped. As the sound of running footsteps grew closer, David knew their carefully constructed deception was about to unravel. He locked eyes with Daphne, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. With Vex's suspicious gaze boring into him and Thorne's approaching footsteps echoing through the corridors, David steeled himself for the confrontation to come. The fate of the colony, the future of two species, and his own destiny now hung in the balance. Balance. The sound of Thorne's approaching footsteps grew louder, and David's enhanced hearing picked up the ragged breathing of the escaped Vidian. In a split second, David made his decision. He turned to face Commander Vex, his posture straightening as he prepared to reveal the truth. But before he could speak, Thorne burst into view, his eyes wild with desperation. "He's human!" Thorne shouted, pointing an accusing finger at David. "This is all a lie." Chaos erupted. Vex's men raised their weapons, training them on David and the other Vidians. David's newly enhanced reflexes kicked in, and he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a stun blast. "After him!" Vex bellowed, his face contorted with rage. David sprinted down the corridor, his Vidian-enhanced muscles propelling him forward at incredible speed. He could hear Thorne's footsteps behind him, along with the heavy boots of the Galactic Council forces. The chase led them through the winding passages of the colony, past startled Vidians who pressed themselves against the walls to avoid the pursuing group. David's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan as he ran. He burst through a set of airlock doors, emerging onto the icy surface of Glacius VII. The bitter wind whipped at his face, but his altered physiology barely registered the cold. David pushed forward, his feet finding purchase on the treacherous terrain. Thorne was close behind, his ragged breathing growing louder. The sound of the council forces grew more distant. They were falling behind, unable to match the pace of the two enhanced beings. David's enhanced vision spotted a steep cliff ahead, its edge barely visible in the swirling snow. He pushed himself harder, knowing he needed to end this chase before the council caught up. With a final burst of speed, David reached the cliff edge. He spun around, facing Thorne as the other Vidian closed the distance between them. Thorne's face was a mask of hatred and fear. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, lunging at David. The two collided with bone-jarring force, their enhanced strength evenly matched. They grappled on the edge of the cliff, each trying to gain the upper hand. David could feel the ice cracking beneath their feet, small fissures spreading outward with each movement. "Why did you do it, Thorne?" David grunted, straining against the Vidian's grip. "Why betray your own people?" Thorne's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand. The council promised me a cure for our infertility. They said they'd save our species if I gave them information about the colony and you." Before David could respond, a loud crack split the air. The ice shelf beneath them gave way, and they plummeted into the darkness below. David's world became a blur of white and blue as they fell. His enhanced body reacted instinctively, twisting to protect vital areas. They hit an outcropping, bounced, and continued to fall. With a bone-jarring impact, David landed on a ledge deep within the crevasse. Pain exploded through his body, but his Vidian enhancements were already working to dull the agony and repair the damage. As his vision cleared, David saw Thorne nearby, pinned beneath a large chunk of ice. The Vidian was alive but clearly injured, his face contorted in pain. Above, David could hear the muffled voices of the council forces. Commander Vex's authoritative tone carried down to them. "I want this entire outpost locked down. Find the human and bring him to me, alive." David knew he had to act fast. Despite everything, he couldn't leave Thorne to die. He crawled over to the trapped Vidian, his enhanced muscles straining as he worked to lift the ice block. Why are you helping me?" Thorne gasped as David freed him. David's teeth gritted as he helped Thorne to his feet. "Because it's the right thing to do. Now, we need to find a way out of here." As they began to search for an escape route, Thorne's words echoed in David's mind. The council's promise of a cure, their interest in the colony's research, it all pointed to something bigger at play. Above ground, Daphne found herself face-to-face with Commander Vex in a makeshift interrogation room. The Galactic Council officer's eyes bored into her, searching for any sign of deception. Tell me about your relationship with the human, Vex demanded, his voice cold and calculating. Daphne took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew she had to be careful, to reveal enough to keep Vex interested without compromising David or the colony. David, the human, he's been instrumental in our research, she began, choosing her words carefully. We've made significant progress in solving interspecies genetic compatibility issues. Vex leaned forward, his interest piqued. Go on. As Daphne continued to navigate the treacherous waters of Vex's interrogation, Zara was working furiously behind the scenes. Her fingers flew over a hidden console, sending encrypted messages to Lyra and a growing network of resistance within the colony. Deep in the crevasse, David and Thorn made slow progress upward. Their enhanced strength and healing abilities were the only things keeping them alive in the frigid darkness. The Council, Thorn panted as they climbed, they're not just interested in our colony. They want to weaponize our biotechnology, use it against other species, including humans. David's blood ran cold at the revelation. The stakes were even higher than he'd imagined. As they neared the surface, he could hear the voices of Council forces searching for them. With a final push, David and Thorn emerged from the crevasse, blinking in the harsh light of Glacius VII's pale sun. For a moment, there was silence as they took in their surroundings. Then the sound of weapons powering up filled the air. David found himself surrounded by Galactic Council forces, their cold eyes fixed on him and Thorn. As he raised his hands, David's mind raced. He was still in his Vidian disguise, but for how long? And even if he maintained his cover, how could he protect the colony, reunite with Daphne, and stop the Council's nefarious plans? The icy wind of Glacius VII whipped around them as David faced this new challenge, knowing that the fate of two species, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. Balance. David barely had time to process the gravity of the situation. Before the Council forces closed in, their weapons trained on him and Thorn. Don't move, a gruff voice commanded. Commander Vex pushed through the circle of soldiers, his eyes glinting with triumph. Well, what do we have here? David remained silent, his mind racing. He could feel his Vidian disguise holding. But for how long? Take them into custody, Vex ordered. Separate interrogations. I want to know everything about this colony and its unique inhabitants. Rough hands seized David and Thorn, forcing them apart. As they were led away, David caught a glimpse of Thorn's face. The Vidian's expression was a mix of fear and resignation. The Council forces had established a makeshift command center within the colony. David found himself in a stark, windowless room, facing Commander Vex across a metal table. The air was thick with tension. Now then, Vex began, his voice deceptively calm. Let's start with your name. Davin, David replied, drawing on his military training to keep his voice steady. He could feel a faint tingling sensation across his skin. His genetic modifications were under strain. Vex leaned forward. And your role here in the colony? David carefully crafted his response, providing just enough truth to seem cooperative. I oversee our adaptation efforts, ensuring our people can thrive in this environment. As the interrogation continued, David walked a razor's edge. Each answer was a calculated risk, revealing some information while protecting the colony's most vital secrets. He could see the growing frustration in Vex's eyes, even as the commander pressed for more details about their biotechnology. Meanwhile, deep within the colony's infrastructure, Lyra set her resistance plan into motion. She gathered a small team of trusted Vidians, their faces set with drive. We move through the terraforming tunnels, she whispered, activating a holographic map. Team 1, your objective is to free Daphne and Zara. Team 2 will sabotage their comms, move quickly and quietly. The resistance members nodded, their eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the map. They disappeared into hidden access points, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the colony's ambient hum. Lyra led her team through narrow, winding passages. The air grew colder as they descended, their breath forming small clouds. They emerged in a shadowy corridor near the Council's makeshift detention area. There, Lyra breathed, pointing to a guarded door. She pulled out a small device, its surface covered in intricate circuitry. Daphne, I hope you're ready for this. Inside the room, Daphne and Zara sat in tense silence. The door suddenly hissed open, revealing Lyra and her team. Before the guards could react, a pulse of energy from Lyra's device left them unconscious. Impeccable timing, Zara said, a hint of a smile on her face. Daphne rushed to Lyra's side. David, we need to find him. Already working on it, Lyra replied, handing Daphne a set of tools. But first, we need your expertise. We're building an EMP device to disable their weapons. As Daphne and Lyra worked feverishly, David felt his control slipping. The tingling sensation had intensified, and he could see alarm growing in the eyes of his guards. His features were beginning to shift, the Vidian disguise faltering under the strain. One of the guards stepped forward, his weapon raised. Commander, something's wrong with the prisoner. David knew his cover was blown. In a burst of enhanced speed and strength, he lunged forward, catching the guards off guard. He disarmed the first, using the man's momentum to throw him into his companion. Alarms began to blare as David burst out of the interrogation room. The corridors became a maze of flashing lights and blaring sirens. David's enhanced senses were overwhelmed, but he pushed forward, desperately searching for a familiar face. David! He spun to see Zara emerging from a hidden passage. Relief flooded through him. This way, Zara urged, pulling him into the concealed tunnel. Lyra secured the research data. We need to get to the secondary control center. As they raced through the tunnels, Zara quickly updated David on the Resistance's plan. The gravity of the situation settled on his shoulders. The fate of the colony, perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. They emerged into a large chamber filled with complex machinery. Daphne was there, her hands flying over a control panel. Her eyes lit up when she saw David, but there was no time for reunion. We're ready, Lyra announced, holding up a sleek device. This EMP will give us the edge we need. Commander Vex's voice echoed through the colony's communication system, cold and threatening. Attention, traitors! Surrender now or face lethal force. The biotechnology of this colony will belong to the Galactic Council. David met Daphne's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. With a nod, Daphne activated the emergency protocol. The colony shuddered, ice beginning to creep along the walls. Let's move, David said, his voice filled with perseverance. It's time to take back our home. The Resistance members fanned out, preparing for the battle ahead. As David checked the makeshift weapon Zara had given him, he caught sight of his reflection in a nearby panel. His features were a blend of human and Vidian, a visual representation of the two worlds he now fought to protect. The sound of approaching council forces echoed through the corridors. David took a deep breath, centering himself. Whatever came next, he knew the real fight was just beginning. Beginning. The Resistance fighters braced themselves, weapons at the ready, as the sound of approaching council forces grew louder. Suddenly, the corridor filled with a blinding flash and a deafening boom. The EMP device Lyra had constructed pulsed outward, frying the council's weapons and communication systems. In the ensuing chaos, David led the charge, his hybrid strength allowing him to overpower the disoriented soldiers. The battle raged through the colony's corridors, but the tide had turned. Without their advanced weaponry, the council forces were no match for the enhanced Vidians and their human ally. Within hours, the invaders were subdued and contained. As the adrenaline of victory faded, the true cost of their triumph became apparent. Large sections of the colony lay in ruins, the delicate balance of the terraforming process disrupted by the conflict. Icy winds howled through breached walls, and the environmental systems struggled to maintain livable conditions. David surveyed the damage with a heavy heart, his features shifting between human and Vidian as his genetic modifications fluctuated. We can't stay here, he said, turning to Daphne and the others. It's not safe anymore. Lyra nodded grimly. There's a contingency we never thought we'd have to use, a hidden underground facility designed to withstand extreme conditions. It's our best option now. As the colony's inhabitants gathered what they could salvage, David felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His skin tingled uncomfortably, and he stumbled, catching himself against a wall. Daphne was at his side in an instant, her cool hand on his forehead. "Your genetic structure is destabilizing," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We need to get you to the medical bay in the new facility immediately." The evacuation was a somber affair. Vidians, who had called this place home for years, now found themselves refugees in their own world. David watched from a stretcher as they filed into the underground complex, a vast network of tunnels and chambers, carved deep into the planet's crust. Once inside, Daphne and Lyra wasted no time. They set up a makeshift lab, working tirelessly to stabilize David's condition. Days blended into nights as they ran test after test, adjusting the delicate balance of human and Vidian DNA within him. During a rare moment of lucidity, David found Daphne asleep at his bedside, her hand intertwined with his. Despite the pain and uncertainty, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. Their bond had grown stronger through this ordeal, transcending the biological differences between them. Meanwhile, Zara led teams to salvage what they could from the damaged colony above. On one such mission, they made a crucial discovery, an abandoned Galactic Council communication device, still functional despite the EMP blast. Back in the underground facility, Zara worked to decrypt the device. Her efforts paid off when they intercepted a transmission from Commander Vex to the galactic capital. The news was grim. "He's taken samples of our biotechnology," Zara reported to the colony's leadership. "And that's not all. They're planning a large-scale retaliation against us. They want to create weapons that can neutralize our genetic enhancements." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their victory had been short-lived, and now they faced an even greater threat. It was Thorn who broke the silence. The former traitor stepped forward, his face set with persistence. "Let me help," he said. "I can infiltrate a nearby council outpost, gather intelligence on their plans, maybe even sabotage their efforts." David, newly stabilized thanks to Daphne and Lyra's efforts, considered the proposal. Despite his initial reservations, he recognized the value of Thorn's offer. "Do it," he said finally, "but be careful. We can't afford another betrayal." As preparations for Thorn's mission began, David found himself grappling with his new reality. Lyra's latest treatment had given him an unexpected ability. He could now control his transformations between human and Vidian forms at will. It was a powerful advantage, but one that came with its own set of challenges. In the privacy of their shared quarters, Daphne helped David explore his new ability. "Focus on the feeling," she guided him, her voice soft and encouraging. "Visualize the change you want to see." David closed his eyes, concentrating. He felt the now familiar tingle across his skin, but this time it was under his control. When he opened his eyes, he saw Daphne's face light up with a mixture of awe and affection. "You did it," she whispered, reaching out to trace the contours of his now fully Vidian face. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the tension that had been building between them finally broke. David pulled Daphne close, their lips meeting in a kiss that bridged the gap between their species. It was a moment of connection, of hope in the face of uncertainty. But even as David and Daphne found solace in each other, the threat of the Galactic Council loomed large. The colony's leadership gathered to formulate a long-term strategy for survival. "We can't stay on Glacius 7, Zara stated, pulling up a holographic star chart. "I've identified several potentially habitable planets beyond the Council's influence. If we can find a way to get there—" "An exodus," Lyra mused, her eyes scanning the glowing points of light. "It's ambitious, but it might be our only choice." As they debated the logistics of such a massive undertaking, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Zara's hands flew over the controls, her face paling as she interpreted the data. "Long-range sensors have detected a council fleet," she announced, her voice tight with urgency. "They're coming much sooner than we anticipated." David's mind raced as he absorbed the news. They were out of time. The Exodus plan, Thorn's mission, his own evolving abilities, all of it would have to come together now, in this moment of crisis. "Prepare for immediate evacuation," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Salvage teams, gather everything you can. We need to be ready to move at a moment's notice." As the underground facility erupted into frantic activity, David caught Daphne's eye across the room. In that shared glance, they both understood the gravity of what lay ahead. The fate of the Vidian species, the future of human-alien relations, and their own intertwined destinies hung in the balance. With the Council fleet drawing ever closer, David knew that every decision, every action from this point forward, would be crucial. The race against time had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. Higher. The race against time had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. Alarms blared throughout the underground facility, their shrill cries echoing off the metallic walls. David's voice cut through the cacophony, steady and authoritative. "This is not a drill. All personnel, initiate emergency evacuation protocols immediately." The chamber erupted into controlled chaos. Vidians rushed to their assigned stations, gathering essential supplies and equipment with practiced efficiency. David stood at the center of it all, his form shifting between human and Vidian as he coordinated the efforts. "Zara, what's our status on the Council fleet?" he called out, his eyes scanning the holographic displays surrounding them. Zara's fingers flew over the control panels, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. "I've managed to hack into their communication network," she reported, her voice tight with concentration. "David, it's worse than we thought. Commander Vex is leading the assault personally." A ripple of tension passed through the room. David's mind focused, his mind racing through the implications. "He wants revenge," he muttered, "and a chance to get his hands on more of our biotechnology." Across the room, Lyra and her team of scientists worked feverishly, surrounded by a sea of complex equipment and glowing data streams. "David," she called out suddenly, her eyes wide with excitement, "we've done it. We've managed to miniaturize the terraforming technology." She held up a small device, no larger than a handheld communicator. "These portable units could be crucial for establishing a new home," she explained, her voice filled with a mix of pride and urgency. As David approached to examine the device, Lyra lowered her voice. "There's more," she said, her eyes darting around to ensure they weren't overheard. "We've made an unexpected breakthrough. We've developed a method to temporarily grant your shape-shifting abilities to other Vidians." David's eyes widened at the implications. "That could revolutionize our chances for survival," he breathed. In the midst of the frantic activity, David caught sight of Daphne across the room. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos around them faded away. He made his way to her, their hands intertwining as they found a quiet corner. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, searching her face. Daphne's expression was a mixture of purpose and fear. "I'm scared, David," she admitted. "This planet, it's all I've ever known. The thought of leaving, of trying to find a new home." Her voice trailed off. David pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "We'll face it together," he promised, his voice low and intense. "Whatever comes next, we'll get through it." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by a sudden commotion. Thorn burst into the chamber, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt. "I made it," he gasped, leaning against a nearby console for support. David rushed to his side, steadying him. "What did you find?" Thorn's eyes were grim as he delivered his report. "There's a secret council facility on a nearby moon," he panted. "They're developing weapons designed to target our genetic enhancements. Prototype stage, but if they succeed..." The implications hung heavy in the air. David's mind raced, formulating a plan even as he issued orders for the final stages of evacuation. "We need a two-pronged approach," he announced, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Lyra, you'll lead the main evacuation on the Ark ship. Get our people to safety." Lyra nodded, her face set with dedication. "Consider it done." David turned to the others. "Daphne, Zara, Thorn, you're with me. We're going to infiltrate that facility, destroy those prototypes, and steal any data that could help protect our people." Lyra stepped forward, holding a set of small injectors. "Take these," she said, handing them out. "They contain the experimental shape-shifting treatment. It should give you an edge on your mission." As the evacuation reached its final stages, David and his team prepared for their dangerous mission. The Vidian Ark ship, a massive vessel that seemed to blend organically with the fabric of space itself, launched under the cover of advanced stealth technology. Moments later, David's team departed in a small, nondescript vessel. As they slipped past the Council's perimeter, using the confusion of the evacuation as cover, David caught a last glimpse of Glacius 7 through the viewscreen. The icy world that had been their home was now shrinking rapidly behind them, a silent reminder of all they were fighting to protect. As they set course for the secret moon base, David felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The fate of his people, the future of human-Vidian relations, and the balance of power in the galaxy itself might well hinge on the success of their mission. He looked around at his team, Daphne, her face set with persistence, Zara, her fingers dancing over the ship's controls, and Thorn, his eyes haunted but resolute. Together, they plunged into the vast emptiness of space, racing against time and towards an uncertain destiny. The small ship cut through the star-studded void, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire species. Ahead lay danger, possible betrayal, and a confrontation that would shape the future of the galaxy. But for now, in the quiet of their vessel, David and his team prepared themselves for the challenges that awaited them on the secret moon base. The Stolen Council battleship hurtled through space, its sleek form a stark contrast to the organic designs of Vidian vessels. Inside, David and his team worked feverishly to stay ahead of their pursuers. "Multiple contacts on long-range sensors," Zara announced, her fingers dancing across the unfamiliar controls. "Council ships, closing fast." David gritted his teeth, fighting against the pain that racked his body. The shape-shifting treatment coursed through his veins, pushing his physiology to its limits. He could feel his form fluctuating, caught between human and Vidian. "We need to buy more time," he growled, his voice distorted by the transformation. "Thorn, what have we got for weapons?" Thorn's eyes darted across the displays, deciphering the Council's systems. Plasma cannons, pulse torpedoes, and something else. Some kind of experimental weapon. A sudden lurch sent them all stumbling. Daphne steadied herself against a bulkhead, wincing at the pain from her injury. "David, we can't keep this up much longer," she said, concern etched on her face. David nodded, his mind racing. He knew they needed a plan, and fast. As if on cue, the ship's communication system crackled to life. "This is Lyra," came the strained voice of their scientist ally. "The spatial distortions are failing. We're about to be exposed." The gravity of the situation hit them all at once. The entire Vidian exodus hung in the balance, their future dependent on the next few moments. David made his decision. Zara set a course to intercept the Ark ship. Thorn, prep that experimental weapon. We're going to create one hell of a diversion. As Zara adjusted their trajectory, David felt a fresh wave of agony wash over him. His body shuddered, muscles rippling and reforming. With a roar of pain and willpower, he pushed the transformation further. Before the eyes of his stunned companions, David's form shifted dramatically. His frame expanded, taking on a monstrous appearance that melded the most formidable aspects of both human and Vidian physiology. Bony protrusions erupted from his skin, forming a natural armor. His hands morphed into powerful claws, and his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "David," Daphne gasped, a mix of awe and concern in her voice. "Are you okay?" He turned to her, his features a terrifying blend of the familiar and the alien. "I'll manage," he growled, his voice deeper and more resonant than before. "We have work to do." As they approached the Ark ship's position, the pursuing Council fleet came into view. Dozens of sleek, predatory vessels bore down on them, weapons charging. "Now, Daphne," David commanded. Without hesitation, Daphne activated her own shape-shifting abilities. Her form blurred and shifted, taking on the appearance of Commander Vex himself. She strode to the communication panel and opened a channel to the Council fleet. "This is Commander Vex," she barked, her voice a perfect imitation of the Galactic Council leader. "Hold your fire. The fugitives have taken me hostage. Fall back and regroup." For a moment, the Council ships hesitated, their formation breaking slightly. It was all the opening they needed. "Thorn, now!" David roared. Thorn activated the experimental weapon. A pulse of energy unlike anything they had ever seen before erupted from their ship, engulfing the space around them in a cascading wave of distortion. The Council ships closest to them began to warp and twist, their hulls buckling under forces they were never designed to withstand. Alarms blared throughout their own vessel as the energy wave threatened to tear them apart as well. "Zara, get us out of here," David commanded, bracing himself against the ship's violent shuddering. With a burst of acceleration that pushed them all to their limits, Zara piloted the stolen battleship away from the chaos they had unleashed. Behind them, the Council fleet was in disarray, their pursuit momentarily halted by the aftermath of the weapon's discharge. As they raced towards the Ark ship's last known coordinates, David fought to maintain his hybrid form. Each passing moment brought fresh waves of pain, his body rebelling against the unnatural state he had forced it into. "David," Daphne said softly, placing a hand on his transformed shoulder, "you can't keep this up much longer." He met her gaze, seeing the worry in her eyes. "I have to," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "For all of us." The ship's sensors pinged, alerting them to a new presence. The massive form of the Vidian Ark ship materialized before them, its organic hull pulsing with life. "We've found them," Zara announced, relief evident in her voice. "But the Council fleet won't be far behind." As they approached the Ark ship, ready to dock and join their people, a new crisis loomed. The Council's orbital defenses, previously focused on the moon base, had reoriented. A barrage of energy weapons lit up space around them, threatening both their small vessel and the vulnerable Ark ship. David knew that the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but the future of human-Vidian relations and the balance of power in the galaxy. With his hybrid form granting him unprecedented strength and resilience, he prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The stolen Council battleship maneuvered towards the Ark ship, its hull scorched and battered. Inside, David and his team braced themselves for the final desperate push to safety. The fate of two species hung in the balance as they raced against time, the relentless forces of the Galactic Council closing in from all sides. David's hybrid form pulsed with energy as he assessed their dire situation. The Council fleet loomed ever closer, their weapons primed and ready to obliterate both the stolen battleship and the vulnerable Ark ship. Time was running out. "We need to draw them away," David growled, his voice a low rumble that reverberated through the bridge. "Zara, plot a course for that nearby asteroid field. We're going to play decoy." Zara's fingers flew across the controls, her expression a mix of perseverance and concentration. "Course plotted. But sir, the asteroids are highly unstable. One wrong move and we'll be space dust." "That's what we're counting on," David replied, his mismatched eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "Thorn, ready all weapons. We're going to give the Council a chase they won't forget." As the stolen battleship veered sharply away from the Ark ship, David felt a wave of agony wash over him. His body flickered, human features melting into Vidian and back again in rapid succession. He gritted his teeth, fighting to maintain control. Daphne was at his side in an instant, her face etched with concern. "David, your body can't take much more of this. The genetic instability is getting worse." Before he could respond, the ship rocked violently as the first volley from the Council fleet found its mark. Alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Return fire!" David roared, bracing himself against a console. "Zara, get us into that asteroid field." The stolen battleship surged forward, its engines straining as Zara pushed them to their limits. Behind them, the Council fleet gave chase, their sleek ships cutting through space with predatory grace. As they entered the asteroid field, chaos erupted. Massive chunks of rock and ice hurtled past them, some larger than the ship itself. Zara's piloting skills were put to the ultimate test as she wove through the deadly obstacle course, narrowly avoiding collisions at every turn. Thorn's hands danced across the weapons controls, firing precise bursts that shattered asteroids in the path of their pursuers. The Council ships were forced to break formation, scattering to avoid the deadly debris. In the midst of the frantic evasion, David stumbled, his body racked with another wave of genetic instability. Daphne caught him, her eyes wide with fear and drive. "I have an idea," she said, helping him to a nearby medical station. "It's risky, but it might buy us some time." Working swiftly, Daphne cobbled together a makeshift genetic stabilizer from the ship's limited medical supplies. She pressed an injector to David's neck, and he felt a cold rush as the stabilizer entered his system. Almost immediately, the violent shifts in his form began to subside. David flexed his hands, marveling at the temporary reprieve from the constant pain. "It won't last long," Daphne warned, "but it should help you maintain control for now." A proximity alert blared, cutting their moment short. Commander Vex's flagship had broken through their defensive screen, closing in fast. "Evasive maneuvers," David ordered, racing back to the command station. "Thorn, target their weapon systems. We need to blind them." As Thorn unleashed a barrage of fire on the pursuing flagship, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Lyra's strained voice filled the bridge. "David, we've cleared the Glacius 7 system, but we have a critical problem. The cloaking technology is draining our life support systems. We have less than 48 hours before conditions become unsustainable for the refugees." The news hit David like a physical blow. They had escaped immediate danger, only to face a new, equally deadly threat. "Understood, Lyra. We'll rendezvous as soon as we shake these council dogs off our tail. Hold on just a little longer." As he cut the communication, David's mind raced. Simply evading their pursuers was no longer enough. They needed a permanent solution, and fast. His eyes fell on a flashing indicator on one of the ship's displays, a weapons cache previously unnoticed in the chaos of their escape. David's hybrid vision, enhanced beyond human limits, allowed him to make out the details of the cache's contents. "Prototype terraforming weapons," he breathed, a plan already forming in his mind. "Thorn, access that weapons cache. Daphne, I need you to look over the specs. We're going to use these to create our own safe haven." As Daphne pored over the weapon schematics, David turned his attention back to their pursuers. Commander Vex's flagship was closing in, its weapons leaving scorch marks on their hull with each near miss. "Zara, set a course for the gas giant in the nearby Xylo system," David commanded, "and push these engines to their limit. We're about to attempt something incredibly stupid." The stolen battleships surged forward, plunging deeper into the asteroid field. Behind them, the Council fleet gave chase, their formation tightening as they sensed their quarry's desperation. As they raced towards an uncertain future, David allowed himself a moment to glance at Daphne. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, volumes were spoken. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The battleship broke free of the asteroid field, the gas giant of the Xylo system looming large in their view screen. It was time to make their stand. The battleship broke free of the asteroid field, the gas giant of the Xylo system looming large in their view screen. It was time to make their final desperate move. "Everyone, strap in," David commanded, his hybrid form pulsing with energy. "Zara, take us into the upper atmosphere. Thorn, ready those prototype terraforming weapons." As the ship plunged into the swirling clouds of the gas giant, turbulence rocked the vessel violently. Alarms blared, warning of the immense pressure building on the hull. "Hull integrity at 68% and falling," Zara reported, her hands flying across the controls. David gritted his teeth, fighting against the pain of his unstable form. "Daphne, we need those terraforming weapons modified now." Daphne worked feverishly, her mind racing as she reconfigured the weapon's output. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. Suddenly, the ship lurched, nearly throwing them from their seats. A proximity alert screamed to life. "Council ships entering the atmosphere," Thorn shouted. "They're right on our tail." David's eyes narrowed. "Daphne?" "Done!" she exclaimed, triumphant despite the chaos around them. "The weapons are ready." "Fire!" Thorn activated the modified terraforming devices. A pulse of energy erupted from the ship, spreading outward in a rapidly expanding sphere. The turbulent gases of the planet's atmosphere seemed to part, creating a massive bubble of calm. "It's working!" Zara exclaimed, her eyes wide with amazement. "Atmospheric pressure is stabilizing within the bubble." David allowed himself a moment of relief before refocusing on their next challenge. Zara, get us deeper into the planet. Thorn, open a channel to Lyra's arc ship. As they descended further into the gas giant's layers, David relayed their coordinates to Lyra. The connection was tenuous, filled with static, but the message got through. They're on their way, David announced, his voice strained from the effort of maintaining his hybrid form. Now we just need to hold this position and keep the sanctuary stable. Hours passed in tense silence as they maintained the terraform bubble. The council ships prowled above, unable to penetrate the dense layers of the gas giant to reach them. Finally, a massive shape appeared on their sensors. The Vidian arc ship had arrived. Guide them in, David ordered, his voice weak but determined. As the arc ship entered the sanctuary, a collective sigh of relief swept through the bridge. They had done it. The Vidian refugees were safe for now. In the days that followed, the newly formed colony within the gas giant began to take shape. Daphne threw herself into coordinating survival efforts, working closely with Lyra to adapt their life support systems to their unique environment. Zara and Thorn, meanwhile, pored over the data stolen from the Council's moon base. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the fledgling colony. The Council isn't what we thought, Zara explained during a tense meeting with the colony's leaders. They've been manipulating entire species, orchestrating conflicts to maintain their power. This goes beyond simple politics. They're aiming for complete galactic domination. The revelation solidified their willpower. They weren't just refugees anymore. They were the seeds of a resistance that could challenge the Council's corrupt authority. As the colony settled into a routine, Daphne found herself unable to shake the feeling that David might have survived. Despite the odds, despite the logical part of her mind telling her it was impossible, she clung to hope. One evening, as she worked late in the makeshift lab, Zara approached her with an idea. "I've been thinking," Zara said, her voice low. "What if we modified our long-range sensors to search for David's unique genetic signature? If he's out there, we might be able to find him." Daphne's heart raced at the possibility. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with dedication. For days, they scanned the surrounding space, pushing their makeshift equipment to its limits. Just as they were about to give up, a faint signal appeared on their screens. "It's him," Daphne breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "It has to be." The signal originated from a small, rocky moon orbiting the gas giant. Without hesitation, Daphne began organizing a rescue mission. She selected a team of Vidians who had been treated with Lyra's experimental shape-shifting formula, knowing their abilities might be crucial for whatever challenges lay ahead. As they prepared a scout ship, salvaging cloaking technology from the arc ship, Daphne felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She knew the risks were enormous, but the thought of David out there, alone and possibly in danger, spurred her on. With final preparations complete, Daphne addressed her team. "This mission is voluntary. We don't know what we'll face out there, but if David is alive, we're bringing him home." Zara and Thorn stepped forward, joining the Vidian volunteers. "We're with you," Thorn said, his expression resolute. As the scout ship lifted off, cloaking device engaged, Daphne's mind raced with possibilities. What would they find on that desolate moon? And if David was truly alive, what state would he be in after all this time? The ship navigated through the treacherous upper atmosphere of the gas giant, its hull creaking under the strain. As they broke free and set course for the rocky moon, Daphne steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. One way or another, they would find answers, and hopefully bring David home. The scout ship emerged from the gas giant's tumultuous atmosphere, its hull creaking under the strain. As they set course for the rocky moon, Daphne's heart raced with anticipation. The journey was short but tense, each moment stretching into eternity as they approached their destination. As they entered the moon's orbit, Zara's voice cut through the silence. "I'm picking up a faint energy signature on the surface. It matches David's genetic profile." Daphne leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Take us down, nice and easy." The ship descended through the thin atmosphere, touching down on a desolate plain of gray dust and jagged rocks. Daphne was the first to step onto the surface, her eyes scanning the horizon. "There!" Thorn pointed to a barely visible structure in the distance, half buried in the rocky terrain. As they approached, the structure revealed itself to be a small, makeshift shelter, cobbled together from what looked like pieces of a crashed escape pod. Daphne's breath caught in her throat as she saw a figure emerge from the shelter, stumbling slightly. It was David. His hybrid form was more pronounced now, his skin a mottled pattern of human and Vidian textures. But his eyes, when they met Daphne's, were unmistakably his own. "Daphne!" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "How?" She ran to him, embracing him tightly. "We never stopped looking for you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As the team helped David back to the ship, he filled them in on his harrowing escape from the Council flagship and his crash landing on the moon. His hybrid physiology had allowed him to survive in the harsh environment, but he had been trapped, unable to signal for help. Once back on the scout ship, Daphne administered the genetic stabilizer she had brought, providing David with much-needed relief. As they set course back to the gas giant, David's eyes widened at the sight of the massive sanctuary hidden within its swirling clouds. "You've been busy," he said, a note of awe in his voice. Daphne squeezed his hand. "We had to keep fighting. For you. For all of us." As they docked with the main structure of the colony, David marveled at the intricate network of biomechanical habitats. Lyra was waiting for them, her face a mix of joy and concern. "Welcome back, David," she said, embracing him. "We have much to discuss." In the following hours, David was brought up to speed on the colony's progress and the growing threat from the Council. As Lyra explained the successful integration of the shape-shifting technology among volunteers, David's mind raced with possibilities. "We can't just hide here forever," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We need to take the fight to the Council." Daphne nodded, her expression determined. "We've uncovered some crucial intelligence. The Council is planning something big, and we might have a chance to stop them." David listened intently as Daphne and the others shared their findings from the moon base. The revelation of the Council's true nature and their plans for galactic domination sent a chill through the room. "We need to act fast," David said, his hybrid form pulsing with energy. "I have an idea, but it's risky." He outlined his plan to infiltrate the Council's gathering fleet, using their shape-shifting abilities and stolen credentials to sow discord from within. The others listened, their expressions a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's dangerous," Thorn said, "but it might be our only shot." As the colony's leadership debated the merits of the plan, David pulled Daphne aside. "There's something else we need to do," he said quietly. "My genetic instability, we need to find a permanent solution." Daphne nodded, her scientific mind already working on the problem. "I think I know where to start. With Lyra's help, we might be able to create a stable hybrid form." Over the next few days, as preparations for the infiltration mission began, David, Daphne, and Lyra worked tirelessly in the lab. They combined human adaptability with Vidian biotechnology, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Finally, after countless trials and setbacks, they achieved a breakthrough. David stood before them, his new hybrid form a perfect balance of human and Vidian traits. He flexed his hands, marveling at the absence of pain and the surge of newfound strength. "How do you feel?" Daphne asked, her eyes searching his face. David smiled, pulling her close. "Like myself. For the first time in a long time." As the night before the mission arrived, a nervous energy permeated the colony. David and Daphne found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the habitat, looking out at the swirling gases of their hidden world. "Whatever happens tomorrow," David said softly, "I want you to know that finding you, it changed everything." Daphne turned to him, her eyes shining. "We're in this together, to the end." Their lips met in a kiss that transcended their biological differences, a perfect union of two beings who had found each other across the stars. The next morning, the infiltration team gathered in the launch bay. David, Daphne, Zara, and Thorn stood ready, their bodies shimmering slightly as they tested their shape-shifting abilities. "Remember," David addressed the team, "our goal is to create chaos within the Council's ranks. Use the information we've gathered, exploit their weaknesses, and above all, stay alert." As they boarded their modified ship, David cast one last look at the sanctuary that had become their home. He knew that the fate of not just the Vidians, but countless other species across the galaxy rested on the success of their mission. The ship's engines roared to life, propelling them out of the gas giant's atmosphere and into the vastness of space. Ahead lay the Council's fleet gathering, and with it, the chance to change the course of galactic history. David took a deep breath, feeling the power of his new hybrid form coursing through him. "Set course for the Council's fleet," he commanded. "It's time to bring them down."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.